So we just wanted to have this little internal workshop as we build up towards the anniversary of the charter, to share experiences and also to be able to help and communicate all those who are doing their work in different areas. It's good to hear from each other. It's good to communicate and to also kind of iron out certain things in terms of organizing and activism as we continue to move forward and grow in the climate justice activism that we're doing. So we're recording this and we'll send it out to those who weren't able to attend, and we'll share it with everyone who's here today. And hopefully you can also share it with your networks and others in the climate justice space who you're busy doing activism with. So we've divided this into two sessions. The first being mainly on climate justice education, speaking on experiences in climate justice education as climate justice activists. The work that we do is to communicate this issue to people. So it's good to touch base in terms of the different experiences around that and how we think around that. That will be useful to other people as they continue to do work of bringing more people into climate justice spaces and bringing them into the charter space, but also into broader climate justice activism. And then the second part, we've also focused on organizing within campus spaces and beyond, so that we can help people in terms of clarifying certain experiences that they may have had in doing the work of trying to organize and gain more activists within campus spaces, but also beyond. And then also we'll be speaking about our recruitment drive leading up into the anniversary and beyond. So that's basically the program for today. So this is being recorded, as everyone heard. So please do share with everyone. And now I'll hand over to our chair for the first session on climate justice education.
Hi, everyone. That's me, Shakira Dawood. First session, as Awanda just said, we have first panel is climate justice education, and I want to hand to Matthew Wingfield and Skylar Thornton, presenting on eco-mighties and CJ education work, please.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much, Chair, and the organizers. And also very nice to see everyone else. It's good to be in a space with likely similarly minded people talking about these issues. And I think it's an issue that we're all trying to deal with, how to engage the climate crisis on our campuses. And it's really a tricky one, and one that I think we're all scratching our heads about. Anyway, I'm going to just do a very brief introduction. And Skylar, who is not Matthew Wingfield, she's actually Skylar, she will do the real work here. But I think I just wanted to give some sort of background, a broader analysis, a broad brushstroke of what I've seen on campus. So what we're trying to do is we've tried to develop a politics around the Climate Justice Charter and an interest around the Climate Justice Charter at Stellenbosch. And I'm sure, as we all know, on our campuses, that's quite a tricky thing to do, even though it seems blatantly obvious that that's something that our campuses and people, staff and students need to really focus on. But with our environmental society, I think what we've done, so that's eco-mighties, mighties as in Stellenbosch. What we're trying to do is, eco-mighties have signed on to the charter, and that's a great first move. But in many ways, the charter is developed for to include various other issues, right? Social justice issues, etc. And I feel like that's not really been recognized. So the communication, the education around these issues, I think, while it's somewhat easy-ish to get students around that are focused on environmental issues to think about the Climate Justice Charter and environmental issues on campus, trying to make these connections is really tricky. But I think where the foundational, I see my camera still like thumbs up in here, but I don't know if that's still happening. But yeah, I think it's a fundamental issue that we really need to think about, and one in which, so in Stellenbosch, a place that's historically white and problematically so, and continues to be in the same breath, the protests that we have held and hold often are attended just by white environmentalists. So something that we really do need to do and make these connections between social justice, climate justice, across campus, but not only among students, I think among staff as well, and showing them that the Climate Justice Charter not only for student organizations and student groups and students on a personal level, but also on an institutional level. I think it provides a very important way of envisioning a better future. So the education around that, I think, needs to be a bit more upfront and a little bit more pointed. And yeah, I think what we've done as Stellenbosch has just shown what are the limitations. We've revealed limitations more than anything, rather than doing real advocacy work and making a lot of progress. So I think that's a similar thing around all campuses. But anyway, Skylar, please take it away.
Yeah, thanks, Matt, for giving that introduction. I do agree with you on a lot of things that you brought up, particularly the part where we see there isn't a lot of engagement from across the campus in terms of students and also from the institution itself with these issues and with presenting the Climate Justice Charter as a working document that can be implemented in various ways in terms of policy. And I think a lot of the times with finding an entry point for people to be able to communicate on these issues is very difficult. And that's led to a lot of attempts at trying to create spaces where we have students working together, students creating conversation, and in order to, collectively speak about these issues. So, for example, we did have as Matthew said, we had a march at Town Hall in Stellenbosch, and it was attended mostly by young white activists and some students from the nearby high school as well. In those kind of spaces, we don't need the people who know what we're talking about to attend. We need students who don't know what's going on and who need more clarity and to be educated on these topics. And to try and involve people, as we all know, is quite a difficult thing. But I suppose the only thing that we can do is just try our best to approach these situations with kindness and with understanding that people do not understand these issues on the same level as we do. So Ecomatis hosted an Earth Week where we collaborated with UNASA and various other student organizations on campus. And that showed a lot of good cooperation between us and students and creating spaces where we could invite people in the conversation and talk about climate change through activities that not really are climate related, like a movie screening and a green market, gardening sessions, things like that, that is an easy entry point into the space that will invite the conversation. And I think that these spaces are perhaps more important at times than the protests themselves, because they can lead to bigger things and they're not just a horde of angst and passion going against a big institution, but they're spaces where people can learn more and kind of grow the movement in a subtle way. Also, the two biggest things that have happened on campus recently has been the beginning of the divestment campaign from Fossil Free Stellenbosch, the revival of the movement from Ecomatis. And I do believe that this is another entry point that's easy to understand, but also a way for the Climate Justice Charter to integrate in a different way and perhaps go from the bottom up so the university slowly but surely adapts to the different levels of the charter, as opposed to just adapting the whole thing as a complete policy change. So going forward slowly but surely towards a bigger difference. And then secondly, we hosted a Emoja conference that was mostly to do with the UNASA group on campus, which was the African Student Leaders Network, and the focus was on climate change. I think that space in particular was incredibly important because it hosted a lot of student leaders and people from the institution and created this cross-band communication. I look forward to seeing things like that happening again in the future, and also for more people to be involved with that and more students to have access to attending that and watching it. So yeah, I think that's pretty much all I really have to say about how it's going on here in Stellenbosch. I really hope that we create more spaces where people can have an entry point and find it easier to access this knowledge and to access these conversations, because I think that that is very important. But yeah.
Thank you so much, Skylar, for sharing. I'd now like to hand over to Awanda to speak on anti-austerity macroeconomic policy choices to advance a climate justice deal.
So the title for what what I'm speaking on is a bit of a mouthful, but I'll put it better in the sense of climate justice education and the work we've done through the Charter, the work that we continue to do through the Charter, by educating people on climate justice, by focusing some of the more difficult things to grasp in terms of macroeconomic issues, anti-austerity, things that are seemingly progressive goals in the way in which we address the climate crisis. Sorry, seemingly progressive goals in terms of how we address the issues of society, but linking them with the climate crisis. But to put that in a coherent way in which people can understand, to link our socio-political issues and social political solutions to dealing with the many issues that our country faces with climate justice, we have to focus basically also on what the question of climate justice is. What is climate justice, and how do we understand climate justice? And to communicate that to people, usually the way in which people tend to communicate climate justice goals is through the science. And the science is obviously a very powerful tool. It's a very necessary tool in how we understand the climate crisis and how we understand where we're going in terms of how we want to deal with it and mitigate the climate crisis and its effects. But the science is not enough, because the science can bring people into understanding the issue, but the science does not connect it to what they face in their lives. And that's where the concept of social justice within climate justice matters, and where it's necessary for us to emphasize those points. I think some of the things that you were saying right now, Skylar and Matthew, with regards to Stellenbosch, the characteristics of climate activism or environmental activism speaks to some of the issues that we face with regards to some of these social hangovers that our country still faces due to its history. And that's a very clear way in which you're indicating a social justice orientation in your approach to climate justice. So it is a bit easier for us to make those connections, and it is necessary. And you can see that with young activists in climate justice space, in comparison to the older generation, seem to be more primed and more ready to make those connections. But in a global South perspective, and in a country like ours, I would also argue that it's very important that we also emphasize the economic aspect of it. The economic aspect is obviously very difficult to talk about most of the time, because the realm of economics and the realm of economic issues and how we solve them tends to be mired in jargon and language, which really alienates people from being able to speak confidently about those things, or even to feel that they have a right to have a say on how they think those things should be mattered. But it's important that we don't allow that space to be used as something that, oh, these experts are the ones who will talk and handle that. But it's important that in our climate justice demands, as the Charter does, we take that ground and we're able to find new ways of articulating what those demands should be, because we all in some way understand that most of the problems that we face in our society, before we even add the climate crisis to it, are mixed in with the realm of the economic. The demands for a more equal society, the demands that people have just on the ground with regards to the inequality that we face, economic inequality, which is also seen through unemployment, youth unemployment more specifically, and things of that nature. We have to be brave enough and to stand our ground and saying, well, we demand solutions that also deal with that. And hence, I think that's what makes the Charter a powerful tool. And in our communication with regards to climate justice issues, it's also what makes the Charter a very beneficial tool in communicating climate justice demands, but also what can be done and what should be done. And I think this is what, for me, would probably be the most important thing in climate justice advocacy, but also educating people on these issues, is that we have to give people alternatives. We have to give people the option of understanding that there are ways to deal with this. I think that's the most powerful thing about it. And I think in climate justice spaces, and you speak to climate justice activists, there is a tendency for us to, term I'll use is to marinate, mentally marinate on the negative. You know, we sit in it, we stew in it, because it's a big problem. It's a big problem, and it's one which, despite the amount of energy that we put into it, and despite the amount of focus that it may get, it can also seem overwhelming. And that's why offering people the alternatives, helping people, steering them towards ways in which we can deal with this. For example, the 14 systemic alternatives in the Charter not only helps to re-energize us as activists in the work that we do when we speak about this, but it also helps bring people into the space, into understanding the struggle without immediately, you know, hitting them over the head with how big this problem is, or how futile it may seem, because it's not necessarily a futile thing when you understand that these alternatives exist. And there are other ways in which we should be able to communicate and link these things in ways which are practical for people to see in their lives. So I think in South Africa, for example, or other countries like ours, communicating things such as the climate crisis would be difficult, usually because of all the other things that we face and all the other things that we need to grapple with. But I think, for example, in this country, with the flooding that happened in KZN, you have really practical things that impact people's lives that they already understand with regards to how bad and how worse things can get, but they haven't been connected with the ways in which those things should have been dealt with and the ways that they should be dealt with in the future. I think another example is with regards to the droughts that we've faced in the past decade. People in the agricultural sector, small scale farmers, local community cooperatives, rural women who grow and live off subsistence farming, they understand and deal with that kind of climate impact head on. But they're also the people who are showing the way in terms of what we should be doing and how the state should be thinking, and communities and municipalities should be thinking about dealing with this issue. So sometimes also where these things are happening, these solutions are also being shown there. And it's important for us to highlight those things and to offer those things up to people to see that this is not a hopeless situation. People are already doing the work where it's happening right now. And that's why for us, food sovereignty is such an important thing, because it's a very practical tool that deals with issue that we're facing, hunger, but also offers an alternative to mainstream agricultural practices that are adding to the climate crisis. So this is what I would say is probably the most important part of the work of climate justice activism and climate justice education, is to provoke people to break away from the norm mentally. That is the first step, and I think that's the most powerful step. And I think that the Charter offers that, and I think that all the various activists that we have interacted with in this space show and offer that also. But it's also the work that we need to continue doing in all the different spaces and across the different streams of activism that we encounter, that we can, you know, galvanize people, but also add energy back into the fight that they're already putting into the struggle, by provoking a break away from the norm mentally through these alternatives. I think I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you, Awande. I think you raised some very important points, especially on climate justice advocacy and how there are alternatives available. And as activists, I think we, excuse me, sorry, that's my baby sister. Yeah, as activists in the space, I think it's very important that what we end up doing is that we hold like all these issues above our head and we like get overwhelmed, and then we try to advocate and like put our energy forward, but I don't think we really getting the message across and the energy that we have properly across. But also on the point of like in science and climate justice, the jargon and how we are educating other people, we might not be getting the proper message, like how the struggle is really related to them. So yes, thank you for sharing all of that. I would now like to hand over to Zuhair, chairperson of panel, the next panel. Thank you.
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm Zaire. I'm interning at COPAC at the moment. We were supposed to have Natalie speaking on this session on organizing on campus and beyond. She couldn't make it, and Ruth is scheduled to replace her, but I think Ruth is running a bit late because she's in another meeting. So one day, perhaps can we move on to Noor and Palestine Solidarity and Amnesty and then come back? Yeah. Noor, if you're ready, you can go ahead.
Sure. Thank you, Zuhair. Hello, everyone. My name is Noor. I am an intersectional activist. Thank you, Awande, for asking me to speak today. He gave me a very broad sort of guideline in terms of what I'm supposed to talk about. And there's a lot that we could unpack within that guideline. But essentially, I'm supposed to talk about my experiences and of organizing on campus with Amnesty, but also my experience in the Palestine Solidarity space and sort of takeaways on that. So if I do ramble a little bit, please, Zuhair, just like cut me off. So my experience has been super interesting. I think being an activist, I've been actively doing this for a year, and there's a lot that I've learned being in this space. And I feel like the biggest thing that I've learned is that a lot of this is very contextual, and the barriers or sort of the obstacles that you face really depend on the type of work that you're doing, who you're dealing with in the space, and what action you're trying to take. So my experience of being in the climate justice space and the human rights space with Amnesty is very, very different to what my experience has been like in the Palestine Solidarity space. So I think it's really important for us to keep context in mind. One of the things that I learned last year, because we had a lot of restrictions when it came to COVID, was that there is a difference between offline and online activism. So online activism is more, you're tweeting about things, things on Instagram, and it's more like stuff like this, a discussion or workshop or a webinar that's online. And then you have the stuff that's more offline and in person. And there's pros and cons to both of them, and I feel like both of them are really important. Just as the work that I did with Amnesty Vets last year, we kind of incorporated both offline and online activism when it came to the social justice and environment space that we worked with. So I'll give you an example. We looked at the Durban chemical spill. So during the July unrest, a chemical factory that's actually based in a residential area in Durban, there was a fire, and that kind of led to all of these chemicals that ended up being deposited in the river, and affecting the communities that were around this chemical factory, which should not have been there to begin with, because it's a risk to people's health to have a chemical factory in a residential area. So what we did as Amnesty Vets is we got into contact with people on the ground, and there were a couple of journalists who were trying to cover this, and so we ended up doing a webinar that not only brought in these journalists, but also residents who were affected by this. There were a lot of health complications that entire situation around the Durban chemical spill was not really picked up on, and it didn't really get the kind of coverage that it should have gotten. It was a big environmental disaster, and the media just kind of brushed past it. I mean, I guess that they were kind of busy covering the rest of something that's incredibly important. So we Instagram, we compiled pictures of sort of the pollution in the river and all of the dead animals around it and everything. We got people's experiences on video, and then we had the webinar where people spoke about their experience. But then we also decided that that wasn't enough. And when restrictions were kind of easing up, in October, we hosted a climate justice demonstration outside the Gauteng legislature. Just so that we could also bring in people in person to talk about how incredibly important it is that people who make the laws in the country start focusing on issues centered around climate change, centered around climate justice and social justice. So that's kind of like one of the things that we did, which incorporated both us working online, which had its own like reach, but also then translating all of that online stuff and awareness into in-person, offline kind of activism. And there was a lot that we learned throughout that process. And so I'm just going to go through, like, I did, like I said, a very broad sort of guideline about what I'm supposed to talk about, but I just thought I put together sort of a few points on, as like young people on campus, one of the biggest things as young people do. Sorry, is it?
Sorry, no, yeah, I think we're losing you, but perhaps maybe if you switch off your camera, then the connection will be a bit more stable.
Is this better?
Yeah, that's better. Thanks.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, no, my internet connection is not great. Sorry about that, everyone. Yeah, so that we need to do is or activists, whatever work that you need to know what exactly it is that you stand for and what your goal is. I think it's really important to have like a clear picture of what exactly it is that you're working towards. And I feel like having this picture will help you break down your like overarching goal into like sort of manageable small ones, which will all then contribute towards your main objectives. So with the Durban chemical spill, our overarching goal was to make sure that we raise awareness about this environmental disaster that has happened, and we get more people talking about it. And we wanted people to focus more on climate justice. So we broke that overarching goal down into, okay, how are we going to raise awareness? Make those infographics for Instagram, get people to share it on their stories. Let's tweet about this. Let's get, different people involved. Let's work collaboratively towards these little goals. And I think that's really important. But I think it's also important for us to be hopeful throughout all of this, because sometimes, especially when it comes to being in this space, you don't see immediate results, and that can be very, very discouraging. So you have to like remain hopeful, especially when people in power don't want to take climate change seriously, don't want to like put climate justice on the agenda. But we also need to remain sort of realistic. Some things might not work out the way that we want them to, but that doesn't mean that there's always lessons that can be learned from the process. Another really important thing is to try to be collaborative and work with people who have a similar vision to what it is that we're trying to achieve. And with people who have the same goal as us, we can't really function in a vacuum, whether it is individually or within a single organization. And I feel like I'm a strong advocate that the best solutions are the ones that include the people who the issue affects, A, and B, which are co-created and sort of consulted on. So you can't really like talk about someone's lived reality or like what they're experiencing without including them in the conversation. So we couldn't really talk about this chemical spill without actually including the people who were the ones who were directly affected by it. So the residents in the area who were having all these health complications, there was someone who was a cancer survivor who started feeling extremely, extremely sick because of the air that she was breathing in. And it was really important for us to have her story be shared. And I think it's really important that we don't, I think Awande touched on this, we're not going into this as like the people with who are, you know, the experts. None of us can really be like super knowledgeable or know everything about a specific issue. So I think it's really important our work is collaborative, but it's also community based. And we're always making sure that we are bringing as many people into this, and also that our work is translated into something practical where it can be relevant and can resonate with people. It's really great to have these conversations, but we can't keep having conversations. We need to now start thinking of concrete steps or practical things that we can do to achieve our goal. So it's really important to have awareness, you know, activities that focus on raising awareness and education. But I think it's also really important to see what is like the purpose of this awareness and education, like where is it leading us to? And I think in the sort of climate justice space in South Africa, we've been talking quite a lot with different people, different organizations, and we've been trying to create solutions or sort of concrete steps. And I think that's something that we need to start focusing on more. It's the actual, you know, practical things that we're doing. I think it's also really important that we have to be ready to be reactive as well and prepared to respond to different types of challenges which might arise. And in order for us to do that, we have to ensure that we communicate effectively and in a way which gets our point across, tackle different challenges such as, you know, lack of resources. We know that funding is very scarce, but that doesn't mean that the work stops. So you have to be really, really creative in order to mitigate all of these challenges, some of which we can't necessarily foresee. You know, being creative is a really important skill because it helps us when it comes to problem solving, but also when it comes to like coming up with different campaign ideas or different sort of like solutions. You also have to be like adaptable, you know, be open to new opportunities, even when it comes to an issue you might be facing. I particularly like what Skyla said, that at Stellies, they sort of conscientized people about climate justice through activities that didn't necessarily like relate to climate change. And I think that's like a way of conscientizing people that is very subtle, but also very important. And this is where sort of my work in Palestine organizing comes in, because unfortunately, we all know this, that Palestine is sometimes an issue that a lot of people will tend to shy away from or not want to get involved in. And I started noticing that even when it comes to activists themselves, they might support you in the background, but they don't really want to be seen as being involved in Palestine organizing. And I feel like it's really important in that sort of sense to conscientize people about the issue in a way that is very subtle. So we hosted a series, it was a day-long workshop here in Johannesburg, and Miguel was actually there, so maybe he can chat about his experiences. And it focused on a number of different issues, including climate justice and climate change. And what we did is we brought in Palestine, but in a way that sort of related to other issues. So how is, like, for example, climate change and Palestine linked? You know, we all know that climate change will affect the oppressed and the marginalized the most. And people who don't already have like access to resources and who don't have like proper shelter, who are living in refugee camps and who are oppressed, they'll be affected the worst when it comes to climate change. So Palestinians will actually get the brunt of it. So making those sort of intersectional links when it comes to talking about these issues, I think is really, really important. And that also links to us being more collaborative in the work that we do. So all of us have the shared vision of being, living in a just, equitable society. That's what all of us in the activism or organizing space are working towards. So it's really important that we see how it is that we can work with each other, or drawing the sort of links with each other, even if the main focus area is something that's different. But I believe that it's all interconnected. So, yeah.
Awesome, thanks, Noor. I think particularly the points you made on balancing the online versus offline activism, or in-person activism, is important, because sort of in the post-COVID situation that we find ourselves in, or post-COVID, using that term quite liberally, I think activism and being on the ground is quite complicated. I see Ruth has just joined the meeting. Yeah, hi Ruth. If you're willing, can we go into, yeah, the floor is yours.
Apologies, I'm not sure if I heard that correctly.
Yeah, the floor is yours. You can go ahead.
Hi everyone. I am just here from the Tax for Climate Justice group. We've just finished a session that speaks to, we were doing an educational session to just let people know a little bit more about what climate science is, what climate justice is, how we try and incorporate both of them, and then how we're trying to get the University of Pretoria on board with the Climate Justice Charter. And so, yeah, we just ran a session which was very informative, very enjoyable. It was just an informal session, but that was very enjoyable. But basically, that is just one of the initiatives that we're running at the moment. Obviously, we're trying to incorporate climate justice and start discussions on climate justice around the campus of the University of Pretoria more broadly, and trying to get people more involved with the movement, because obviously it's an interdisciplinary issue, and there are people from a wide variety of degrees and backgrounds that should and do have a vested interest in climate change and the issues surrounding climate change and climate justice. So we were just trying to inform more people, start a bit more of a discussion, and hopefully we wish to incorporate that more and have more events. I'm really not sure what else I'm here to say, but yeah, the environment needs saving and stuff when it's already we have a long way to go, because we've got an incredible amount of damage, but it's always important to still be fighting to mitigate that damage, and do so in a way that is just to communities, and in a way that ensures that we have a just transition in South Africa, and that we ensure that adequate conversation and dialogue is occurring. So yeah, thanks.
Thanks. Yeah, I think there's a lot of links to pick up on to what everyone has spoken so far, especially in terms of keeping the awareness and keeping the conversation going, but also having practical solutions to sort of creating concrete change and materializing the sort of gains that we want. I think also another point that you made that was quite important was strategizing around that. And I think the charter does a good job of sort of providing us with a framework with sort of goals and stuff that we can reach, and that framework to work off. I wonder if I can hand to you to do the last two sessions.
I think our next speaker, our last speaker, will be Jane on the recruitment drive. And then we can just allow some time for discussion after that.
Great, thanks, Awande. Hello, everybody. I'm Jane Cherry. I don't think I've met many of you, but some I have before. I've been a little bit out of the loop, just because Awande's been overseeing our youth CJCM stuff. But yeah, it's very exciting and inspiring to see what some of you are doing, just to hear about some of your activities and the lessons that you're learning. And yeah, this is definitely informing the broader movement. So thank you firstly for what you're doing, but also for sharing your lessons with us. So I'm just going to talk briefly about what we've been doing when it comes to recruitment and mobilizing as the broader national kind of campaign. So yeah, we will be having our 2-year anniversary. So 2 years since the launch of the charter on this Sunday, well, not this Sunday, but Sunday, the 28th of August. So coming up soon. And in the run up to that event, we've really just been trying to push mobilizing, pushing recruitment, getting people to set up forums. Yeah, just so that we can have a nice turnout, but also because it's really urgent. As Ruth was saying, the environment isn't getting any better, and we definitely, urgently, desperately need a deep just transition. So Wande and Charles, part of the COPAC team, have been reaching out to various organizations and individuals and activists, asking them to set up CJCM forums. And it's been quite encouraging to hear that some people have already set up forums. I mean, students have different forums. They may not necessarily be called a climate justice charter movement forum, but it's a forum that has some kind of climate justice element to it and is promoting the charter and is endorsing the charter and sharing the charter and the climate science. And so, yeah, it doesn't necessarily have to be called an official CJCM forum, but we really are trying to get forums embedded in communities, in workplaces, in different sectors where people can discuss the charter as a first step, educate others, but then the idea is to eventually use these forums to promote the deep just transition locally. So this forum would then go to the local municipality and say, we demand this and this and this, and we want food gardens here and there. And so basically making demands and ensuring that the deep just transition is driven from below. So that's the reason why we're doing this, why we want this drive, why we want people to set up forums. And yeah, I guess you could also go to universities, and we are already doing that, asking them to adopt the charter with the various petitions and things. At WITS, we've been setting up food sovereignty centers, trying to drive the just transition from below, ensuring that hungry students have food. So we've got food gardens. I know Stellenbosch also has some, trying to create an eco demonstration site. So really just building these lots of little localized spaces and pathways towards climate justice. So we've been reaching out to organizations and activists just to see what is on the ground. I mean, we've had connections with them all along since the launch of the charter and before when we were developing the charter, but we just trying to ramp this up. At the same time, we are trying to ramp up recruitment for the website. So I'm not sure if all of you have seen the website, but I think I'll share it with you briefly in a moment, just to show you what this kind of back-end organizing will look like. And this has great potential, we think, for organizing, which I'll show you in a bit. Actually, maybe I'm just going to show it to you now. I've spoken about forums and yeah, recruiting members. Let me share my screen. I see somebody has to leave. Can I just check this chat? Miguel has to leave early. Not a problem now. Okay. So this is our website. Can everybody see that? Yeah, cool. This is the website. You can scroll through it. Most of you seen it. You can join, endorse, and log in, and then this is the menu. So we are encouraging people to join, which takes you to this page as an individual organization. So I've also been reaching out to all the organizations who've endorsed the charter, over 200, and then all the individuals on our mailing list, around 1,000, sending them emails, asking them, giving steps. Some of you might have received those emails, giving steps on how they can join. So when you click on join as an individual, you have to not be party aligned and not part of a political party. So we're asking for contact information.
Sorry, Jane, I think you may just be frozen. Sorry about that. I think Jane's audio sorry, her network might have cut, but she's probably logging back on now. We'll just give her a second.
Hi, everyone.
Hi, Jane.
Sorry, my network cut and then I just couldn't connect, but I'm finally back. I'm really sorry about that. Can I keep going? Were you?
Yes, please.
Okay, so sorry. Can you quickly share again? My network keeps doing this, it's so annoying. Okay, so I think I lost you here. When you log in, this is where it'll take you to the dashboard. So we have the dashboard where you can see if there's any activity. At the moment, there's not much activity just because we haven't really gotten going yet. You can go to your groups. You first need to log in. Groups. So I'm part of the climate justice campaigning group because that's what I selected when I signed in, when I registered. There's the national forum, which is where anyone can post messages. So Charles has recently posted about the 28th of August event. And then he's also put in an attachment, which is our poster. It would be nice if it could show, but we don't really have that functionality yet. And then here are all the members. We've got about 60 something or so. You can mention members, like Stephen wrote the first message and mentioned people. When you're mentioned, you'll get an email notification. We're still not sure what will happen if someone writes a message in a community or workplace forum. And maybe that's something that we need to build into. So we're still kind of learning, but maybe we need to build in that if someone does post a message in the forum, you'll get an email notification, just so you don't always have to be logging in, unless that's something that you want to do eventually, once this becomes your main social media page, hopefully. So here you'll be able to see your communities. I'm not part of any communities because there aren't any around Johannesburg Gauteng yet, but this is where you'll be able to see them. And then you'll also be able to create a new one if there isn't one in your area. You'll also be able to submit any campaign that you are having, and these will show on the website. So every campaign that gets submitted comes through to us for us to authorize, just so we don't get random campaigns popping up. And then there's the code of conduct. So that is, did I show you the dashboard? I don't know why each one opens in a new tab. That's quite annoying. But, and yeah, and then when there's ever volunteering opportunities, we will put them there. I think that's all. Yeah, so the idea is that on the community and workplace forums, that's where people will be organized. So let's say, Matthew, you've got a student forum. You can put Ecomarties there. Stellenbosch Ecomarties forum, and then anyone who says Stellenbosch who happens to join this website will be able to see that there's a forum nearby and be like, oh, I want to join that forum. And so this is another way to recruit members, kind of not physically. So I think that's all I have to say. I'm going to stop sharing. Thanks, Awande.
Thanks, Jane. So are there any questions, particularly on the site, the login, and the recruitment drive? Just for those. So everyone clear on the websites, and has everyone joined also, particularly Ruth, Danielle, Skylar? Danielle, Skylar? Okay.
I'm pretty sure that we've joined as Ecomarties, but yeah, I'll double check and make sure that we get to that as soon as possible if we have not.
Yeah, I'll also check with Natalie because Natalie was unavailable to speak today, obviously. So I'll just speak with her and check that we are with that.
Thank you. I think it's important to remember just not only to join as individuals, as groups also, because then we can communicate with your various groupings as they are, because you're doing the work already where you are. So it's quite good for us to also be able to see and communicate with you that way, but also as individuals as you are now. So if there aren't any more questions or inputs, I think just like to say that, just to emphasize what Jane said, that next week Sunday, the 28th, if I'm correct, is the official anniversary event. So please do attend, please do pull through and send that invitation out. We have put it out on social media, but if you look at our Twitter feed and the groups also, there is a poster out and the link, so please do share that. Thank you once again, everyone, also for making the time to be here. We will be sending the recording out. I think I just want to thank everyone who spoke today also. I think everything that everyone said was important. I think that this kind of meeting space is also necessary also to share these experiences, to kind of iron out also some of these experiences also is very important, and it's helpful also for people who are doing this work everywhere else. So we will be sharing the recording for those who haven't been able to attend. So please do share within your groups and your networks also. I think that will be part of the process of communicating and helping each other in this work, because wherever you are doing what you're doing, you're not alone. You're part of a network and a group of other similar activists who are doing the same across the country. So if there are any other general questions, please do bring them now.
Oh, Andy, sorry, as host, I don't know how to raise my hand. I wonder if we can just ask some questions to the previous panelist speakers. I don't know if anyone has some questions to them, but I do have one. So there's still a little bit of time if we can do that.
I think, yes, if you'd like to raise your question, since we're here, if you can't raise your hand on the thing, you can just put your hand as Jane, and then you can take everyone's questions and just ask all the other panelists. But Jane, I think, yeah, you may go first.
Cool, thank you. Yeah, I just have a question to Ruth. I think it would be interesting to hear about your event today. just because I haven't been at a university event for a while, especially a climate justice awareness raising thing. So what was it like on campus? What was the kind of interest? Just how did it go?
I think it was a little bit of a small turnout, just because we were having issues, working with institutions can be a little bit difficult sometimes. So it's something that we've been delaying for quite a couple of months because we were struggling to find a venue. So we finally managed to speak with the law department at the University of Pretoria, who have been very, very helpful. They actually even hosted an event a few weeks ago, maybe 3 weeks ago, where they spoke about, there was a broader discussion on environmental rights, and I unfortunately couldn't attend, I wasn't there, but that was very nice that we have this connection now with the law department, and they've been very, very helpful and supportive in that regard. So that is at least a good stepping point, because now, for hosting future events, we now at least have that connection. Because dealing with the administration was a lot more difficult. It wasn't an incredibly big turnout, but we weren't expecting an incredibly big turnout because we are relatively new, and we are only starting to kind of bring forward all of these ideas. And it was also not a formal session in the way that we are planning to have formal sessions in the future, where we have specific speakers or lecturers or people that are in those specific spaces speaking about certain issues that they have done specific research on in order to broaden all of our awareness and education. So it was more narrow in that sense, but there was very good engagement, I think, with the people that were there. People were very, very enthusiastic in what we had to speak about and what we were doing. We obviously handed out the charter to everybody, and everyone got one of these. So there was also that sort of engagement, and I think it was just very nice to speak to people. I always find it a great time when I get to speak to people who are as passionate about the environment and helping mitigate all of these issues and fight for change. So it was a very enjoyable session, and I think very informative to a lot of people there, because they were really introduced a little bit better to what we're about, and also just some of the bigger issues that we're dealing with. So it was a very good stepping stone, I think, and a very enjoyable first step. And we definitely are optimistic about future events, and definitely wanting to encourage wider knowledge about these specific things, because you're trying to, obviously spread into a space that is not already established. And so that always takes a little bit of extra time. But we've been very optimistic, and I think overall it was very successful.
Zuhair?
Thanks, Onde. I think I have two questions to ask, open to anyone who wants to answer. The first one is, I haven't been on campus in a while, and sort of active in the student spaces, but just to get everyone's thoughts on like the political environment on campus now, and perhaps also sort of the climate space versus sort of other political spaces and things happening on campus, as to like perhaps your thoughts on whether you're finding a difference in the response of students to these different spaces, or whether sort of the apathy is just sort of general across these different spaces. And then I think the second question was sort of thoughts on, so in terms of organizing and getting student buy-in on campus. And I think one day you spoke about it a bit about it in terms of the science and moving to capture people's sort of attention and getting them motivated in. And I remember at WITS, there was at the WITS Business School, when the Minister Praveen Gordhan spoke on ISCOM. So sort of topics like that are a bit general, and you can see sort of the as an example, the privatization of SOEs, right? And how that impacts sort of the issue of climate and the private sector's response to climate change and that kind of thing. So if we look at having sessions and topics that are a bit general, perhaps a bit populist, as we see attention going to things, and then contextualizing that from a climate perspective, whether sort of those sort of things would be viable on campus now. Because I think for me, a big thing is sort of getting buy-in, because once you've got buy-in and you've sort of got a forum established and a branch established, then you can start doing things. And I think, you gave like good examples in terms of like strategizing, with Amnesty and how you worked on that, even the sort of Palestine solidarity movement. But I mean, a lot of things are already established, so you're able to delegate tasks and strategize and work on those things. But yeah.
Anyone like to respond? Skylar?
I just want to respond a bit on how we found the protest action and like kind of taking action in terms of the climate space as opposed to other movements. And Stellenbosch has been particularly political this year with the things that have been going on campus. And there's, definitely a huge contrast to when we call upon people to stand for climate justice and to stand outside City Hall and speak openly about these issues, and then also to hand over the Climate Justice Charter. There was maybe 20 to 30 people who showed up, as opposed to mass movement of students after various incidents that have happened on campus. And I think the biggest reason for this is that protest on campus is usually quite reactionary, and something big needs to go wrong first before we stand up and say, oh my goodness, we need to protest about this. And I would really like to challenge that, and I would really like to invoke more protest before things go bad. We don't want more floods and something even more drastic to happen for us to finally allow students, for example, to wake up and be like, we need to protest now, when there's been opportunities to protest before these things happen. But unfortunately, it's difficult to allow people to realize these things without being gentle and understanding first. So yeah, I just wanted to say that.
Noah?
For a second, I forgot how to unmute. I think that's a really important point, Skylar. I think that a lot of the sort of stuff that happens on campus is very reactionary. But generally, I found that over time, particularly after Feast Must Fall, because I'm part of that group of like that generation, campuses have become very depoliticized. Particularly when it comes to sort of issues that don't directly affect students. But we've seen even with student issues, like Wits had Asi Namali last year, and it was a lot of students that were involved in that, but comparing that to the kind of momentum that Feast Must Fall had, it was not the same. Feast Must Fall was huge, and there were so many different students who joined that movement, but Asi Namali didn't get that kind of traction or that kind of sort of involvement when it comes to students. So I think that Palestine issues or even climate justice issues, workers' rights, none of those are really focused on campus anymore. That's just been my personal experience, particularly at Wits. I don't know how it is when it comes to other campuses, but I feel like these spaces have increasingly become more depoliticized. And I think it's because of what Ruth said. It's like that issue with institutions who I feel like are actively trying to depoliticize these spaces. And it's this a simple climate justice like workshop that you have such a difficult time trying to host because they just I'm sure there were many available venues, but they just tried to make the process extremely, extremely difficult for students. So I think that this is something that as students, we need to think about and see how we can encourage people to become more involved. But I also think that COVID also put a lot of strain in the activism or student activism spaces because students weren't on campus for 2 years. It's only that this year that people have been back on campus. I know they're back at Wits, but then some campuses are doing like, they're half online, half in person. So it's a lot of changed spaces. And I think it's like trying to navigate those spaces and figuring out how do we now work in a space that isn't what it used to be in terms of like organizing.
I just wanted to add to what Skylar and Noah are saying in response to Zuhair's question also, particularly on that point with regards to COVID and the kind of mixed nature of how things have gone back to normal across different campuses. From anyone's experience, because I know some may not have had that experience because their varsity experience particularly began within the context of COVID and the lockdown. But for those who've had that experience of like prior to that, the differences that you're seeing now to then, how big are those differences? How difficult do you think it's made, organizing and activism on campus? In relation with some of the reactive nature of things, as Skylar was pointing out to, but just more broadly also, how difficult has it made organizing on any issue on campus? I think there's definitely something to contend with there also. Just thinking also what Ruth was saying about their event today, like how many students are back into that flow? Because I think another thing you have to contend with is you have a large group of students who never had an experience of having events and things like that on campus, like their experience of university has been predominantly online. So I think there's another bigger problem to contend with there for student activism and youth activism more generally, in terms of picking up the pieces and setting a foundation for people who've never experienced what it's like to have those things. So I'm not sure if anyone has kind of experiences like that, but I can't necessarily speak on that because my university experience ended with the beginning of COVID. So I don't know what things are like now. I can only speak to what it was like before. Zuhair?
Yeah, I just want to add on to what you're saying, because I think also playing a role in that was sort of that post-Follis era, right? I think there was sort of that political apathy sort of started growing from sort of post-2018, 2019, and then COVID comes in, and I think complicates things further. So yeah, just to contextualize that as well, because I think during that Follis moment, as things sort of arose, it sort of gave energy to other things and it created this momentum that happened. So yeah, just to add on to that point.
Ruth?
It's too much finding the hands up button, but I just wanted to speak to Zuhair. I'm not sure, but Zuhair, is that right? Zuhair? Zuhair, good. Sorry, I never know when I'm pronouncing people's names correctly. But I think to speak about the point of apathy, I don't think that people necessarily don't care about the issues that much anymore. It's just they've gotten to the point where they don't really want to do anything about it, and it's not their problem. I think coming from a crisis situation that was COVID, coming from a situation where, the world was just chaos, I think people at this point, for the most part, are actually wanting peace. And you can understand that sentiment, right? Wanting to just live your life and go to university and get your degree and just move on because it's been chaotic. So I can understand that sentiment. I think when it comes to the only issues, I think that Noah was speaking about earlier, which is speaking about the only issues that are really raised, the ones that are very directly student related. And I can get that because because of people's general idea or want for this peaceful existence. I think when it comes to the only things that are really pertinent and eminent in people's minds and in us students' minds is issues that are related directly to students, right? And even then, people are not necessarily wanting to go above and beyond because they're like, we don't want to cause issues. And I think that premise is something that is going to be a mindset, I think, as a trend for the next couple of years, but something that we have to know as a contextualization to in order to be able to work with, right? Because it's not like these issues disappeared while everybody is wanting peace. That's not something that happens, right? Just because we don't want to deal or interact with the issues, or we don't want to be directly involved, doesn't mean that all of a sudden magically we don't have to care about the environment anymore, or we don't have to care about all of the multitude of other issues that we face, right? So I think that it's something that we have to kind of approach and look as a contextualization. And what you were speaking about with working with different organizations and contextualizing whatever issues are there in some sort of climate frame makes a lot of sense to me. I attended a Amnesty International AGM, and there was a lot of passion in that kind of discussion and discourse because it was about student issues. And I think if we can find a way to collaborate more with other organizations and get a wider scope, then we can also say, look, this is the issue, we understand it, this is how the climate justice movement incorporates similar ideas, and this is what it means. Because I think to most people, climate change and this idea of 1.5 degrees is an illusionary symbol, right? It's not something that people necessarily feel in their day-to-day lives, even though sometimes they do, but then it's in the form of floods, or it's in the form of drought, or it's in the form of water issues and scarcity, or lung diseases because of pollution. But it's not necessarily always accepted as or understood as the wider movement. And I think that's also why we were wanting to infiltrate more areas with that sort of education in order to bring awareness to directly what we're wanting to speak about when it comes to climate justice, what the Charter speaks about, in order to let people know that this is not an issue that you can just, sleep on. It's something that you have the space to involve yourself, and we in an academic institution, that an academic institution that's not giving us the education or the knowledge that we actually need to survive in a world that is constantly under threat with all of this multitude of climate issues. So I think it's a perfect space in order to gain that education that is a little bit lacking, I think, in most scenarios. But yeah, I definitely agree with you. There's definitely a lot of nuance to be had, and a lot of collaboration that needs to occur, and also just in order to help encourage people to be a little bit more on the forefront of these very important issues.
Charles?
Yeah, thanks, Awande. I'm just wondering how these challenges around organizing actually impact on institutionalizing on campus, like establishing CJCM societies and stuff. Because varsity politics is always transitory. There's a time when there are so many committed activists, and then there's a time when you don't have those activists when they are done with their studies. Also, there are times where there's high political consciousness, where the conditions are ripe to establish movements and so on. So how do we navigate all these challenges and institutionalize? Because once we have a society established on campus, then you have a center where you can conscientize people. We have a center of mobilization as well. So I'd just like to hear your guys' opinion on
that. Skylar?
So yeah, just to answer that, I know Eco Marties at Stellenbosch University has been the focus point for a lot of different campaigns that have started on campus, namely the Stellenbosch for Climate Justice, and also the divestment campaign that just started with Fossil Free Stellenbosch. So to have an actual society that's kind of like the house for a direct link to the institution, and have a structure within that of a chairperson, secretary, all of these positions, and then to allow that to foster the different campaigns. I think that's incredibly important in order to allow for effective communication between the campaigns that are happening and the institution, without there being something that can be shut down, so to speak. So with small campaigns starting, they are very important, but they don't have a lot of steam or backing if there's no structure behind them. And I think that's also the idea that came with Tux for Climate Justice starting as an actual society. And I know Natalie struggled a bit to get people involved in order for it to be established as an actual society, because there's so many different rules that you have to follow, and there's like a set amount of people you have to have involved in order for it to be considered an actual society and stuff like that. So they do make it fairly difficult for you to do things properly. But I think that within all of these structures, there is a way if you care enough. And there is always going to be continuity when you've established good foundations. And I think if nothing else, that's what I've tried to do within my space within Eco-Marties. And I think that's what our goal for this year in particular was, is just creating more foundations and less startup campaigns that are just going to fall as soon as we leave, as you say. So yeah, I think that's incredibly important in order for these things to continue on campus.
I just wanted to add also to Skylar's response, but in addition to Charles's question, within institutions, obviously establishing those societies, establishing those groups sets that foundation and allows for that work to continue and that work to be, maximized within that space. But also how does this context, or how do we then also make those links across institutions also? Like what you were saying in terms of your experience, Skylar, of knowing what Natalie's process was and what's happening in Tux. Because I think that when I think back to probably the biggest, or what's clearly the biggest kind of student activist issue, or the biggest student movement in recent times, these are all things that cut across campuses. Even if they didn't begin at the same time, or if they were hosting an action, if the action didn't happen at the same time, you knew that the issue was picked up in this institution and that institution and that institution. So I think another question is also, and I know it's difficult when you're in one space and you're a student and you're juggling all those things, to be like, I'm focusing on trying to make sure this thing is running, but I'm also trying to keep an eye on what's happening in that university, or who's doing what's that university. But I'm also curious in the ways, and like, what are the possibilities or opportunities to make those links, and how those links can help the work that you're already doing to help add to, the process that you're already doing. Because I know it's difficult, like Ruth said, they had an event and they had to deal with the university administration. They have to deal with, that bureaucracy. But what are the other links that can be made across campuses in the region, in the area, but also further, that can actually help the work that you're doing where you are right now? Because universities, I know different universities are different in terms of their setup, but they also tend to be spaces where people aggregate, and not everyone who's there is, part of the university space. Like, for example, if you're in studies, people from UWC or UCT also tend to attend events at certain, and vice versa, and things like that. So I'm just thinking around that. No?
I think that's a really, really important question, and a really important point. And I think when we look at Fees Must Fall, that's the one thing that they got right. It's the way in which the students work together, not just on campus, but across campuses. And I think what happened, they sort of consulted with each other, or they had meetings that lasted 2, 3 in the morning. And, it was that solidarity. It was students that looked out for each other. And I think that there's a lot of
Oh no, it seems that it just froze for.
it's to is it better now?
Yeah, you're back now.
Okay, yeah, I think the camera doesn't help. So I think that there's a lot of lessons that we could learn from sort of the people who were involved in Fees Must Fall. And I think the ways in which we could make sure is that our work transcends different campuses is to do what was done during Fees Must Fall, where you had, I was at UKZN at the time, so people who were mobilizing for Fees Must Fall would not just meet with students within UKZN, but then it would be students from DUT, students from all these other different campuses, and I think it's really important to link then with the campuses in your region. So Tux could link up with VITS, and link up with other sort of smaller campuses, Varsity College in the area, if there are any of these other smaller sort of campuses, and get to put together a group of people who could then see, okay, this is what our objective is, this is what our goal is, how can we all work together? And I feel like it makes the work easier as well, because it's a more collaborative process. If you are coming up with solutions, those can then be applied across all contexts, because it's, university students across campuses. I think that's something that could be used to sort of get that momentum going. And in terms of ensuring that the work carries on after you've graduated, I think this is a really weird way of saying it, but that would be, as people who are involved in the movement now, actively like recruiting or like headhunting, quote unquote, younger sort of people who are in like, if you're in third year, people who are in like first year or second year, and it's a lot of work. This isn't easy. And this is how we make sure that that movement kind of keeps going, even within different organizations. It's a one day now going to different campuses, actively speaking to students, and bringing them in. And that's how that movement keeps going. So if you're in like third year, you talk to the first years, you talk to the second years, you tell them why this cause is really important, and you're on the ground sort of bringing them in, so that when you graduate and you're kind of past that stage, the organization doesn't crumble after you, and that work kind of continues and they keep that momentum going.
Just to also add to what Noor was saying, I think another important thing, I think when it comes to climate justice activism, not just in this country, but I can see internationally also, is I think the biggest weakness is how everyone is not divided, but kind of spread out, in the sense that there's different groups doing similar work, but they don't even know that they're doing that work close to each other. So I think the thing that's really come out for me is that every university talks about there's an environmental kind of group, a climate justice group, and there's a divestment group, which makes no sense to me, because you're all trying to achieve the same goals and you should be doing the work together. But it seems that everyone finds out about each other after some time, like, oh, by the way, there's people who work on a divestment. But why have the divestment people never talked to the environmental group, and why aren't the environmental group going beyond environmentalism to climate justice? And I think that is the greatest weakness. And just like Noah saying, aggregating people, bringing together, because that was another thing which I can say from my experience of like the fees must fall era of universities, that you had different groups who had different focuses saying, actually, we all care about the same issue, let's come together. And I think it's the biggest weakness right now in terms of climate justice organizing among students, but I think it could be the biggest strength. And I think that obviously you want a group that comes up as your Extinction Rebellions and your Fridays for Futures, but because they have a name brand recognition because of the international kind of implications when you think about that group and those groups. But in South Africa, there's also different people who are thinking about this differently. So I think that everyone who's already doing the work that you're doing, Skylar, Ruth, and everyone elsewhere, to not be scared to kind of, stamp your say, in the sense of that what you're doing is also important, even if like your name is not like, internationally recognized in the same way. But I think it's important that like you take up that space and you make those connections. I see Noah says that she has to run. Thank you, Noah, for joining. And we are now at the end of this time, but I just want to thank you all for being here once again. I think this was really constructive. But I also think that this set a kind of strategic foundation in terms of how we need to think around this and how we can move together and build in the future. So I do think it's important, though. Another thing is that because we have this network and we have access to these other activists, that we do share information. It's very important that we know what everyone is doing so that we can also help and give solidarity to that. So I think that something like this also will happen again in the future. We'll share this recording, but I also want to ask and implore to you two, particularly Ruth and Skylar, also in the events that you're doing, and even some of the problems you may be having in terms of logistics or bureaucratic kind of blocks and things like that, to share those experiences, to share also some of those challenges, because I think that there's ways in which other people, part of this network, part of this movement, can help in terms of thinking around those things, but also help in the solidarity that they give to the work that you're doing, which also feeds back into them. So this is not a once-off, but this is just the beginning of a process in terms of aggregating those things. But also, I just want to thank you once again for making this time. We will be sharing this recording, and I hope that you do share it within your groups and to spread it far and wide, and that this will be the beginning of a process as we move towards the anniversary of the Charter and beyond, as we're ramping up the what's called again recruitment aspect of that. But we'll also be doubling down on some of the ways in which we have these kind of constructive engagements, particularly in the forums and particularly through the website. So that really is important aspect of the continued work that the Charter movement will be doing. And just to hammer that home, that this is just the beginning of those kind of engagements. So if there are any final inputs that anyone would like to make before we close. Well, thank you once again for being here, and look forward to seeing you soon.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you so much.
Bye.